I'm Elizabeth Lorenz, Chair-elect of the World Affairs Council of San Antonio, and welcome to the University of the Incarnate Word for tonight's program. Big thanks to Julie Weber. Julie, where are you? Standing outside. She's standing outside for helping us secure this room and arranging this at the university. We have a few other World Affairs Council board members here with us tonight. Sarah Alred, John Casey, Ambassador James Tagan, Patricia Diaz-Dennis, and Luke Gilligan. Could you guys just give us a wave so we know where you are? Thanks for being here. Thank you. I'd also like to recognize former HUD Secretary Henry Cisneros. Is he here, Samantha? No. Former Congressman Charlie Gonzalez. Saw you. Sean said, thank you for being here. And we also have some members of Will's family in attendance. Can you guys stand up?
Please give away, give away. Yeah, give away.
Thank you very much. In addition, we have two people here tonight from the book, Lindley Wallace and Nancy Peck.
Yeah.
That's Nancy right here. Introduce our guests. Ernie Zuniga has been waking us up bright and early every weekday as the anchor of Fox San Antonio's highly rated morning show, Fox News First. And before that, he spent 9 years as a sports reporting anchor in San Antonio. He was in Phoenix, Arizona, and in his hometown of Victoria, Texas. He attended Texas A&M University and graduated from the University of Houston, Victoria. He devotes much of his time to the March of Dimes, 100 Club of San Antonio, and the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. Thank you for that. In 2018, he was crowned King of the Riverwalk after helping to raise money for the San Antonio Riverwalk Association. And like all of us, he enjoys many fiesta events and recently served as the Public Relations Minister for Ray Feo 73. He and his wife Tammy have a teen daughter, Ava, and twins Luke and Madeline. Thank you for being here. Will Hurd, who I feel privileged to call my friend, is currently a managing director at Allen & Company and now an author. He's a former congressman, cybersecurity executive, and undercover CIA officer. For almost 2 decades, he's been involved in the most pressing national security issues challenging the country, whether it was in the back alleys of dangerous places, boardrooms of top international businesses, or the halls of Congress. After stopping terrorists, preventing Russian spies from stealing our secrets, and putting nuclear weapons proliferators out of business, Bill helped build a cybersecurity company that prepared businesses for the next domain of conflict cyberspace. While in Congress, he was dubbed the future of the GOP because he put good policy above politics at a time when America was often consumed with what divides us rather than what unites us. He was successful in getting more legislation signed into law in 3 terms than most congressmen do in 3 decades. Substantive legislation like a national strategy for artificial intelligence. Will is a native of San Antonio and earned a computer science degree from Texas A&M University. In addition, he is a trustee of the German Marshall Fund, an open AI board member, and recently served as a fellow at the University of Chicago Institute of Politics. His book is American Reboot, an Idealist's Guide to Getting Big Things Done.
Housekeeping here. Will and I, just full transparency, we go back a ways to our days at A&M together. And this will be the only time probably you see me using the microphone here, but just to kind of set the context, Will and I were at A&M together. I did graduate from University of Houston, Victoria, but back in the mid-90s, we were there together, and as fate would have it, we were both members of the Student Government Association. And because A&M didn't have the massive TV program that I was looking for at the time, we drifted into radio together. And on Monday nights in College Station, if you can envision this, There's a photo somewhere, but Will and I were at KORA, the country music station there in College Station, together hosting a show called Campus Connection on Monday nights. And we would play music with the DJ there and give out coupons for pizza rolls and football tickets and those kinds of things. And who would have known that, he would have taken off and has done what he's done.
Ernie was the boss, and I was just one of the peons.
No,
So yeah, FYI.
So my style, I brought notes, okay? Don't get me wrong. I prepared for this, and I'm honored that he asked me to be here. My style is we're just going to have a conversation among friends here, and you guys are going to eavesdrop. I'm thrilled for him and what he's done, and I've kind of watched in my own little way. I've been honored to interview him a few times about some of the issues over the years. But we're going to talk about Will and the book and everything. And we agreed earlier, because we only have one microphone, and I think we agreed that you kind of lose the spontaneity of the conversation. If I say something and then I go, and then he grabs it, so if you will allow us, we're going to retire this thing for a little bit. We'll bring it back for the question and answer. If any of you cannot hear us, please speak up, because we want to make sure that everyone can hear what we're saying.
Taylor, that's your responsibility in the back. If you can't hear us, you got to raise your hand.
No pressure. Okay, with that, we're going to put the mic down.
So let's talk about, I guess, to borrow a phrase from my line of work, breaking news that just came in a few hours ago, where that Louisiana circuit judge, or federal court judge rather, I guess stopped Title 42 from expiring on Monday. Just happened a couple of hours ago. Your initial thoughts to that? I'm assuming you were in favor of that.
Well, look, Title 42, and for those that don't know, look, I spent 6 years in the Texas 23rd Congressional District, 820 miles of the border, 29 counties, 2 time zones. It takes 10 and a half hours to drive across it at 80 miles an hour, which is the speed limit in most of the district. Justin, my campaign manager, found out the hard way. It's not the speed limit in all of the district.
Oh.
Right? Sorry, Justin. Justin was always driving when we got pulled over, just for the record. And then when I was in the CIA, my job was to oftentimes operate in alias, illegally cross borders, right? I also stamped visas when I was in Congress. So border security, immigration, all these issues are something that I've spent almost my entire adult life working on. Title 42 is only a tool. It's not the only tool. And the problem, and we have a number of folks that have dealt with this issue and as ambassadors, the reality is we are treating everyone that comes to the border as an asylum seeker. Asylum is very specific. You have to be a member of a protected class based on gender. In some places, it's sexual preference, things like that. And your government has to be persecuting you because you're part of that protected class. Or you have to demonstrate that the government is not protecting you from somebody who is persecuting you for being part of that protected class. Now, the Trump administration started this issue of treating everyone as an asylum seeker to actually gum up the system. But the Biden administration has continued it. Title 42 said, because of COVID, in essence, you can deport people. It's a reason to deport people. Now, that's Border Patrol can deport more people that are here. And when we treat everybody as an asylum seeker, the people that actually need asylum are the ones being impacted. It's taking about 2 years now to get through our immigration courts. Only about, over the last 30 years, the average is that only about 20% of people who claim and come for asylum actually get it granted. And so the real solution to all this problem, stop treating everyone as an asylum seeker. You have more immigration judges to get through this backlog. Dismantle the human smuggling networks that are being used throughout Central and South America. It's not easy to get to El Paso from Tegucigalpa. There are organizations, right? You got to call someone. That's what I'm going to do. You got to exchange money. You got to get on a bus. You got to stay in a safe house. You got to do all this. Let's start dismantling these things because they're taking advantage of people that are saving their life savings, and ultimately we're going to eventually get kicked out of the country. And so those are the things we should focus on. Oh, and by the way, streamline legal immigration. Every industry, every business owner here needs workers. And when you're dealing with inflation and potentially a recession, what do you need? You need more people paying taxes. So streamline legal immigration at the same time. And this is how we get out of this problem and out of this mess. And there's a focus on Title 42 because the Biden administration feels and vulnerable Democrats, meaning Democrats that potentially go lose races in November, feel like this is a way to address the problem.
So my parents grew up in Del Rio, and I still have a lot of family there.
Sure.
And there's real concerns about, what's happening there, what happened in Del Rio, with that migrant surge. The mayor of Uvalde was on our air this morning just talking about he doesn't know what to do.
Yeah.
Like, what's going to happen? So, I mean, you were in a lot of those Dairy Queens and those small little communities. What would those are the people that are having a hard time right now. What would you tell them?
Well, I would tell them, say, listen, I'm sorry the government's not listening to y'all, because this has been going on for a number of years. So this is Department of Homeland Security's projections. This is not my projections. This is the current Department of Homeland Security projections, is that potentially by summer, you're going to have 400,000 people a month coming into the country illegally through our southern border. To give some that's a big number. There's some wows. That's a big number. To give some context, in year one of the Trump administration, President Trump only deported for the entire year a total of 200,000 people. And so now here's what's happening. You have all these communities along the border who, in most cases, 50% of the city revenue comes from ad valorem taxes of people coming back and forth across the border. So what do? We shut the border down for legal passage for almost 2 years. So those communities, 50% of their budget was taken away. Then on top of that, you deal with the humanitarian crisis of having thousands of people that didn't know what to do with. So, and then those same communities are dealing with COVID. And so that is what these mayors, county judges, and folks along the border have been dealing with for the last 2 years. And I saw it, it's funny. I need to get over this. But I used to do this thing on Instagram every Friday. It was trivia. I did Friday trivia. I loved doing it. My staff hated it because it was a lot of work, but I loved it. Nancy's shaking her head and being like, yeah, we hated it, right? She's like, but I loved doing it. It was fun. It was fun. And I remember it was early December. I said, you know what? We need to do this thing. We need to do a Friday trivia on this thing, this coronavirus thing. And they're like, what the heck is coronavirus? Yeah. Nobody's gonna care about that in 3 weeks, right? We don't want to know what happened. But we were here, and I always remind folks, San Antonio dealt with this first. The 91 people, American citizens from Wuhan, China, that were brought to San Antonio, Texas. Being intimately involved in that issue, you knew immediately what was going to happen. And go into all these small communities and say, do you have plans to deal with this kind of problem? Oh, yeah, we got it. The pressures these communities have been dealing with for 2 years, and it hasn't stopped. That's why this thing, when we talk about this crisis, it truly is a crisis. Oh, and by the way, one of the things I failed to mention, we got to address root causes in many of these places. Historically, 85% of illegal immigration came from 3 countries, the Northern Triangle, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras. The reason was because of lack of economic opportunity, extreme poverty, and violence in those communities. Imagine being a parent and thinking, my only option is to send my child on a perilous journey 3,000 miles. I don't know what's going to happen. That's how bad the situation is. So we got to address those root causes as well too. But it starts with the communities that are bearing the brunt of this. They're tired. They don't have the resources, and it all goes back to this root issue of we have to stop treating everybody as if they're an asylum seeker, because that is what's pulling people. So last year, I think 130 countries that were that had come through our border illegally. It's no longer just the Northern Triangle. It's no longer just Mexico, and it's because of these bad policies that are exacerbating this issue.
Yeah. So to the book now. What did you learn in researching the book and writing the book? Now that it's been out for a while, you see, I know you've done a lot of media and gotten a lot of great feedback, some big names, love what you've done. Have you had a chance to take all that in?
I have. And what was funny, it started with, what was it, Nancy, June 2019? June 2019? Agent approached me and he said, have you ever thought about writing a book? I said, no. Well, if you were going to write a book, what would you write about? I was like, I don't know. I've never thought about writing a book. Actually, if we're being honest, I'm looking at one of my closest and dearest friends, my brother, Brian. I've known him since I was 13 years old. I did thought about writing a book one time. It's a book on dating. And I don't think that would be the first. That would be the first good book. But he's shaking his head if y'all can't see him. And
it would have been Love Reboot.
Yeah, Love Reboot. See, that's why he's in this business. Yeah, that's why he's in this business. So here's what I actually learned, right, and confirmed. Even my haters, like, I don't like Will Hurd, but this book's okay. Right? Like I take that as a victory, as a win. People are like, yeah, like nobody has been like, Will, you're wrong. No, not one person has said the ideas that you're talking about here are crazy. Not one person has said, you know what? I think shit's fine. Pardon my language.
Yeah.
I'm fine. Yeah, it's not on Fox tonight, right? Fox in the morning. Yeah. It's not the normal morning audience.
No.
After hours with Ernie. That's another. So this was the banter we had back in College Station when we were young on Campus Connection.
We weren't dressed like this.
We weren't dressed like that. And so for me, that has what I've been happy with and proud of.
Yeah.
Right. Is that those ideas have been translated. And one of the sections of the book is titled "Way More Unites Us Than Divides Us." And I knew that was the case because nobody thought a Black Republican could win in a 71% Latino district. Actually, there's like 3 people in this room. Lily Wallace is one of them. She thought that I could win this. Did Patricia walk in? I think I saw Patricia. Patricia Dennis, she believed, right, that I could pull it off. Of course, my family. Well, I actually don't think my sister, my brother thought I could do it, but they. Yes, and my one of my mothers that's here today believed, right? And so, but here's what I found: the district, 71% Latino, had gone back and forth, Republican, Democrat, every cycle. Whether I was in the Colonias of El Paso or the Dominion of San Antonio, people brought up the same things. Why are the roads crummy? Why does my school not have this program? Why I'm a veteran? Why is it so hard for me to get into the VA? Those were always one of the top, the first couple of questions. Should we be worried about this terrorist group? Right? When I won in 2014, ISIS was on its run, and so I realized that if you actually shut up, show up someplace, listen, people are going to talk about the exact same thing. And so I saw that across the district. I saw that when Beto and I did the road trip. You saw that with the people, the 26 million people that watched us in those 30 hours. You saw that feedback. And now we're seeing this when people that read the book. So it's a long-winded answer to your question, Ernie. But and you're looking at me like I'm crazy because that is the exact opposite of what's portrayed on cable news, what's portrayed on social media. And that is the part. But to me, it is very clear, it's very obvious, there's no question about it. And so that's been the thing that has made me happy about the consequences of the book, if you say it that way.
You talk about the stories where was it a Tarriada or whatever, you were in Eagle Pass in the middle, was it a ranch at the end of a dirt road or something? And I mean, but the point is you showed up and you did the Dairy Queens, and you did those kinds of things. And to your point, the issues at the end of the day were pretty much the same.
Look, when I first ran in 2009, and Charlie knows what these Tarriadas in Eagle Pass are like, right? You know, a Republican shows up. There was a band, and there was three city council members that were part of the band. And when I walked in with a friend at the time, you know, it's the first draft of the book. One of my staffers is like, Will, every story starts with like, you were driving somewhere with a friend. It was like, yeah, because nobody thought I was going to win, so I couldn't hire staff, right? But the only reason I had Justin was because he was literally fresh out of college and didn't know any better, right? And so every story starts that way because that's all I had, and I was thankful that I had friends that were like, yeah, I'll take a couple of days off work and drive to the middle of nowhere.
Road trip.
Right?
Yeah.
And so we went to that Tarriada, and Mel was there, and Mel looked like she was straight out of Hollywood. And when everybody stops and the heads turns, I kind of like whispered to her. Oh, I turned to her and she whispered to me. She goes, but I thought they were looking at her.
Right.
She goes, why is everybody staring at you? You know? I was like, because I'm a Republican. But look, everybody would come up like, why were you here? Now, what I call the professional political class told me, well, first they told me don't go because you're not going to win. I never won Eagle Pass, but I went from getting 2% of the vote to what, 40%, something like that. Yeah. And so we showed improvement, and guess what? I represent everybody, not just the people that voted for me. And but they're also the professional political class. Justin's sitting here looking uncomfortable at me. It's like, you know, because he hates it when I get loose like this, you know. The other thing they said, look, you should be talking about conservative issues because most of the people on the border are Latino, they're Catholics, they don't care about this. Like, no, okay, here's what I'm gonna do. When they ask me, why are you here? Because I like to drink beer and eat cabrito too. Right? And they all laughed. Well, they all laughed. And then when I went back the second time, people would actually shake my hand, right? Third time I went back, people would walk by me on the street and be like, I'm a Republican too. You know, like, yeah.
Yo soy Republicano.
Yeah.
I suspect, and I know he couldn't be here tonight, but I suspect that mindset or just the thought of even doing that comes, I mean, your mother perhaps, but your dad for sure.
For sure. And look, our dad, 89 years old, grew up in East Texas. He was the first Black salesman, you know, in a wine company. He was the first Black salesman for a cigarette company.
Sold tobacco, right?
Yeah, sold tobacco. And he would have to show up to convenience stores and small groceries. And you had to get behind, Chuck's laughing because it's like we've heard the story 100 times. You would have to get behind the counter where the guy carried that's where the cigarettes were, his money, and a gun. And my dad would show up in a fresh pressed suit.
In the 50s or what?
This is 50s.
Okay.
This is late 50s, late 50s. And they would call him names. They would call him the N-word, be like, get out of here. But my dad knew he had to get behind there in order to see, what his inventory was. And my dad always said, he was like, before I'd walk in, I look up into the sky and picture that guy's face and be like, buddy, today's your lucky day because you're meeting Bob Hurd, right? And he always taught us to have a PMA, a positive mental attitude. And so if my dad was able to do that when he was getting called crazy names, when he couldn't, even in the 50s and the 60s, he couldn't stay everywhere that he wanted to when he was traveling. He could, people wouldn't allow him to eat in certain places. It was still going on at that time. If he can have a PMA, I can have a PMA, right? And so that experience, and look, I remember one of my favorite moments as a kid was when my dad and I drove to Tyler, Texas, and back in the same day. Yeah, my sister lives with the same day, from San Antonio to Tyler back in one day. And I wasn't driving because I was 11, right? But actually, he probably would have let me drive. But it was you learn that from him, and he wasn't afraid to do those things. Then my mom, right? My mom always told this story. When I was born, my dad was on the road, and so she gave birth by herself, and I had I wasn't breathing. I didn't breathe for the first 90 seconds of my life, and the doctors were kind of freaking out. And my mom, you have all these medicines and stuff. She's kind of groggy, and the doctors are like, he's a strange color. And my mom's on all these drugs. She's like, he's half black, And my mom, she would get looks, right? She would get looks at these three little dark kids, right? It was not in vogue to be an interracial couple in San Antonio in the 70s or the 80s. I always tell people, Tiger Woods has done a lot of things, but there was something he did when he won in 1993 his first Masters, and he was doing an interview, and someone asked him about it, and he said he was multiracial. And I'm gonna be like, that's a thing? That's an option, because we were the only kids that looked like us, right? And so my mom, you would never have known that from her, and she loved us unconditionally, and it was amazing. And then when my dad had the crazy idea to start a beauty supply business when he retired, and a beauty school, it required somebody to be a licensed cosmetologist. So my mom went to cosmetology school. Oh, and by the way, it was a beauty supply for Black folks. And so my mom was the one going in teaching people, Black salons. My brother's laughing because he worked in the business, helped build it. My white mother going into a Black salon teaching some of these stylists how to use a relaxer was interesting. So both of them did things and showed up to places that they'd never showed up before.
So when they go through that in the 50s, and you talk in the book about them trying to buy a house and shady stuff happening with realtors and all that, and the 60s and 70s, and then you fast forward to last Saturday, where you have this young man in Buffalo go in and do that horrific to that top supermarket. I wonder what that brings back to your father, but also you're sitting there watching this unfold and thinking, this is 2022, and we're still seeing this kind of stuff.
It's crazy. Hate is hate, and hate's always going to exist, right? And so, can we do a better job of preventing it from being pervasive? And so, I talk in the book about George Floyd, and Liz, Bianca, you came, Lindley was there. We went to the march in Houston, where George Floyd was originally from, and his family was there. And half my staff, if not most of my staff, was like, don't go, it's a terrible idea. Number one, you're gonna get COVID. Number two, something bad's probably gonna happen, and the headline's gonna be, Justin was like, I don't wanna have to deal with the headline of Congressman Hurd's in a riot.
The optics.
Right, the optics of that. But it was like, look, it was the right thing to do. And one of the things I learned at Texas A&M from the Bonfire collapse is you gotta grieve. You know, when a community deals with a major event, in order to get through it, you actually have to grieve together, and being together was important. And we're sitting there marching, and Liz turns to me, my sister turns to me, she goes, "There's a whole lot of white folks here." And it was a change. And guess what? We have seen that kind of negative image before. The Rodney King beating video is horrific. And so we had seen that kind of stuff before, but there was a change in society seeing this, like, this is not acceptable. The fact that what happened in Buffalo has still happened, and that hate is being moved. All of it, there's a handful of things that these hate crimes and these mass murders have in common. They're perpetuated by a dude who is on the fringe of society. Right, as an outcast, as a misfit, something's wrong. When you look at in the 80s, early 90s, a lot of the mass killings were done by kids that were still in high school, or even some in middle school. Right, the more recent ones have been in this period where people come out of school, and there's no safety net for them. There's these two researchers that have done. There's a thing called the Violence Project. The Violence Project. They have reviewed every mass murder since 1966 and has interviewed every mass murderer that has been alive or since they've been doing this project. And one of the things that they found, they asked each one of them, is there somebody that could have stopped you from doing this? You know what the answer? All of them said yes. Right? And so before we get to the hate issue, there is people that feel like they are out of society, right? And then they're getting these messages that they're being indoctrinated by things. Like I am obsessed with this podcast called Real Dictators. And a couple episodes per dictator, and what you find is these dictators have come to power all through some of the same ways. And it was an indoctrination of society. What is in our heads that allows us to be indoctrinated like this? I do not know. But the hate that is being perpetuated now in 2022, it's crazy that it still exists. But it does exist, and so we got to do something about it. Oh, and by the way, look, I just took 20 minutes explaining the problem, right? You can't solve this problem in just 280 characters. This is not a single problem to this issue, which means there's not a single solution. It's complicated, and we have to do many things, which requires us to have conversations about what we should be doing. We got to have a competition of ideas in order to prevent another community from having to suffer what Buffalo is suffering with right now.
Yeah. Are we okay on time? 5 more minutes? Okay. We'll get some questions in there.
Yeah, I'm not paying attention. Yeah.
You touched on the Bonfire collapse, and I don't know if everybody really realizes you were the student body president at A&M when that collapse happened in 99?
Yeah, November 11, 99. November 18.
12 students died that night. And I vividly remember you. It was as if you were thrust into the national spotlight because I would see you on TV. You would speak at memorials, interviews, speeches. I wonder, and I know at A&M, that's where you were first introduced to the CIA, and maybe your trajectory took a turn toward that. How much did your A&M experience kind of influence you and shape you, and being thrust into that Bonfire situation as a leader, as a public servant? What were your takeaways from that? Well,
look, the Bonfire experience alone, I would give all the lessons I learned up if those 12 kids were still alive. Right. And I often think about them. What would they be doing today if they had the chance? And so that does motivate you. You learn things about crisis communication. The reason I was the person that had to answer these questions was because I was the only person that wasn't going to get sued. I wasn't in the student leadership of Bonfire. I wasn't an official government employee, Texas A&M employee, so I was able to go and articulate what was going on. And you have to remember, this was at a time when cell phones, like, yeah, a lot of us had cell phones, but the infrastructure was terrible. So if more than 20 people were using their phone at the same time, you couldn't get through.
Yeah.
You didn't have social media to be able to say, hey, I'm fine, mom and dad, right? And so parents were freaking out. And look, for me, I went to half of the funerals. And there was a mom comes up to me. I'm 21 years old. And she comes up to me, she hugs me, she's crying. She goes, don't ever let this happen to another mom. What do you say to that? Right? And there was nothing in that moment that I could do to make her feel better and feel that grief, other than to say, yes, ma'am, and give her a hug. Right? And so those experiences have stayed with me from Bonfire alone. But also that experience in running for student body president, I didn't want to run. I was involved in our student union. I was a fifth year. I took a victory lap, right? And I got pissed. There was some problem. I didn't think other people were running. Bianca's over here laughing because she was there when I was like, I'm pissed. And so I decided to run for student body president. And guess what? Nobody thought a black dude from San Antonio,
yes, okay,
when there was 3% black population at Texas A&M, was going to win, right? Against the most high profile student on campus with the highest name ID, right? And we won. And I got about 11,000 votes.
I think I voted for you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. There's like 7 votes in here from that initial one. But here's what's funny. So when I got pissed again in 2008 from these members of Congress, look, not every member of Congress is Charlie Gonzalez, right? I wish I would have met him when I was in the CIA, because I probably would have stayed in the CIA. Because I'd be like, I'm glad that dude is up there, right? Sorry, Congressman, I'd call you a dude. The honorable, my honorable colleague from San Antonio. And I got, when I was upset, because my mom always said, if you're the part of the problem, part of the solution. I saw these members of Congress were countering what my colleagues and I were doing. We were putting ourselves in harm's way to protect the country. And then when these people said, hey, you ever thought about running for Congress? And I said, no. And I started looking, but how long would it take? How many votes would it take to win? 15,000. I was like, heck, I got 11,000 at Texas A&M, and I was only able to spend $300. So literally, like that was part of my senior strategist at the time, Josh Robinson. He's like, it's a little bit different than Aggie Land.
Yeah.
But honestly, that experience made me realize it was opportunities.
Awesome. Okay.
We're getting the high sign. Take some.
Do we have?
If you guys wrote down a question on a question card, William, can you pick them up?
So while we're getting those, I guess the last thing I have for you is, in the course of writing the book, did you have any regrets about leaving Congress? And if I'm to put you on the spot, this would be an excellent place for you to make some news tonight. Are you prepared to say that your political career is over?
Last question first. I'm not prepared to say my political career is over, right? The likelihood that it's very unlikely that, my political career is done. But if I have the opportunity to serve my country again, I would evaluate it. I also think it's a fool's errand to think about any other election than one you're currently in, right? And so the environment for future elections is going to change significantly. And so willingness is only one piece of the puzzle. The other things have to be in place in order to do that. I'm 44 years old, and if there's an opportunity, I'd evaluate it. Your first part of the question, do I miss being in Congress? No.
This didn't make you want to go back?
Not at all. Here's what I miss. The parts of being in Congress that most people don't see or know is what we call constituent services. the last day, literally the last day in Congress, Bianca and I had been working for this young gentleman who was a tick rider. Okay, a tick rider is a person that's on a horse on the border looking for cows that come across the border that has the fever tick, which is a tick that if you have it, you gotta quarantine your like you gotta quarantine hundreds of thousands of acres. This cat fell off his horse, had to get medevaced to San Antonio, Texas. Right? He was obviously working. He gets medevaced to San Antonio. Department of Labor refuses his claim for workman's comp. What? DOD says, hey, this dude's got to pay his bill. Department of Agriculture, who he worked for, starts garnishing his wages to pay for this bill. So this is, and he was making $35,000, $40,000, if that, right? And this poor dude is getting screwed by his government. Some reason somehow comes to us. It's like, this is absolutely wrong. Took us about 7 months. Last day I'm in Congress, I harangue a 4-star, couple of 3 stars, couple of 2 stars, and be like, you can change this. And guess what? They changed it. He got his freaking money back, right? And I said, Nancy, close shop. We're gonna end on that one. And to me, those, like, there's so many of those stories of names of people that y'all will never know. You'll never hear these people's names. I try to talk about some of them in the book. That's the part that was awesome, right? Battling the bureaucracy for people that needed it battled. That part I miss. The rest of it, yeah.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Okay, we ready for the lightning round here? All right, let's see what we got. Thank you very much, sir. Let's see. Okay. Okay. So this says the headline is Positive Mental Attitude. It says you will be addressing a group of Black and Latino students at Sam Houston High School on Monday. What is your message going to be to the youth? Why is it important that you speak to this group?
Yeah. Well, I don't want to use all my material.
Yeah.
Look, I'm gonna tell them what I tell a lot of people. Being a person of character takes practice. Just like being an engineer, being a scientist, being a musician, being an athlete takes practice. Being a person of character takes practice, and doing the right thing takes practice. And the earlier you get experience in doing the right thing, the easier it gets to do the right things when you're older. The other thing I've learned about doing the right thing and being honest is the older you get, there's more consequences to being honest. But the longer you're honest, the easier it gets to be honest, right? And so I've been blessed to have experiences, at every level of my life where doing the right thing had significant consequences. It's going to end up with loss of life. And so that's what I'm gonna communicate. And to me, this group that we're talking to is important because it's always good to have people that look like you, that you can be like, I want to be like that person. Like early person that I wanted to be like was Dr. Jill Marshall at Southwest Research Institute. I thought she was so cool. She was involved in robotics. The fact that I didn't look like her or wasn't, that she was a female, I was a male, I didn't care. I was like, she's so cool, right? So having people that you can potentially identify with and be like, wow, I can do that. That's why it's important to go talk to groups like that.
Okay. This might be tough to answer quickly, but this question says, how do we reboot Texas? Who should be our next governor? Present company included.
Yeah, look. So the way we reboot Texas is the same way we reboot America. We have the majority of our politics is decided in a primary. And we need more people to vote in primaries. So guess what? I'm not going to ask by a show of hands, because I don't want to see the results, because I think the results would be terrible. How many people voted in early voting for the runoff of the primaries? Okay, everybody shaking their hand. There we go. It's a little sophisticated crowd, right? Yeah, and Tuesday is election day for the primary runoff, and everybody in this room has a number of races, whether you vote as a Republican or a Democrat, that ultimately matter. So we need more people voting, right? And doing that in the primary elections, and that is going to go a long way, because the more people we vote, turnout's terrible. March 1 was our primary, not March 1, beginning of this month, was the first primary. 3 million people voted. 1.8 million Republicans, 1.2 million Democrats out of 30 million. It's a terrible number. That number, at a minimum, what, Justin, is going to be half for this runoff election? So that means, let's take a race like Attorney General. That means 400,000 people out of 30 million are going to decide who the next Attorney General is. Because whoever wins the Republican primary is going to be the Attorney General. That's how small that is. The percentage is so low. That's what it requires us in order to get more people involved and to get involved in these elections and to care. But it also requires leaders that are willing to inspire rather than fearmonger. And it requires leaders that are willing to talk about what you're for rather than just what you're against. And to me, that's why I thought this was so important to say, hey, here are some of the ideas that we need to be talking about in order to keep this country, this century, the American century. Because this is no longer about Texas being its best self and the United States being its best self. This is about, we are in a new Cold War, regardless of what the Chinese government says, with the Chinese government. And they are trying to surpass us as the global superpower. And what we have to do in order to stay in this position that we're in, we got to be able to solve some of these questions. And it's going to require us to talk, leaders talk more to the middle than the extreme and the edges. And it's going to require more of us to get involved in the middle.
Are you still okay? A little bit more? Okay. What career advice would you give to a college graduate who feels stuck due to the oversaturation of college graduates who want to make a difference?
What advice would I give to a college
graduate who feels stuck due to the oversaturation of other graduates who want to make a difference?
Look, this goes back to when I lost in 2009. I won the primary, lost the runoff by 700 votes, but I don't tell that story anymore. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know what Plan B was going to be, and I talked to 75 people. 74 people gave me crummy answers. The 75th was one of our best friend's fathers, and he said, "Do something meaningful and hard." And when I realized, and I stepped back and said, "Okay, when I look at all the things that brought me joy and happiness and was able to support myself, it all started with they were things that were meaningful and hard." And so that's the broader advice that I would give to someone is don't shy away from those things that people say you can't do, because with enough effort you can.
Yeah. Okay. A little more time. Okay. Wilson says, "Howdy, damn it." So I'm guessing it's an Aggie. Assuming it's an Aggie. How can we best avoid the politicization of the DoD, I guess, Department of Defense, and national intel community?
Sure. One of the things, we always talk about, was the intelligence community got something right or got something wrong. The role of the intelligence community is to inform, right? It's to collect information and inform policymakers. Policymakers are the ones that make decisions based on that information. And so what one of the things that I think we need to see broader, and I think that my fellow members of the Foreign Service would agree with, is we need to start pushing some of the power back to our ambassadors. Since probably President Clinton, when you started having more people using the internet and being able to like make phone calls back home, and it didn't cost $50 to make a phone call to Bangladesh, for 2 minutes. You started having people making decisions in the White House, and that slowed things down. Give more power and authority to our ambassadors and to our men and women on the ground. That's a first step, and you're going to start seeing things move a lot faster. It also requires folks in our legislative branches to understand that foreign policy is not foreign. It's a fraction of the cost to solve the problem overseas than before it gets to our shores. And one of the things that has allowed America to have created this international order that we benefit from now is because we had not only soft power but hard power as well. Having the biggest, baddest military on earth has some benefit, but that also requires us to use our soft power. And look, the real power of our country is our values. We have shown the world for the last 247 years that the legitimacy of a government and the ability of that government to exercise its power flows from the consent of the governed. We, the people, are the ones that are sovereign, not the government. This was a novel idea. It still is. Why did everybody call America an experiment when we started it? Because nobody thought it was going to work. The last time there had been a democracy on Earth was, let's call it 40 BC. That's when Julius Caesar, he screwed it all up when he became emperor. That was like 44 BC. That was the last time prior to America that there was a democracy. That's why we call this thing an experiment. 60 years later was the next democracy, Switzerland. There have only been 14 countries that have been a democracy for more than 100 years. We assume democracy is a fait accompli. That's all we've ever known. Democracy is fragile. It always has been fragile. It always will be fragile. But this is the example that we have given to the world. And that is what has made this country and our economy the greatest economy and the envy of the rest of the world. Oh, and by the way, it's also helped uplift humanity over the last 247 years. And so we have to remember that. And it's all of our responsibility to preserve it. Guess what? I hate to break this to everybody. We're it. There ain't other people. There ain't other people that are waiting in the wings to be like, we're going to fix this. We're going to fix this problem. We have to do it. So that requires us to model the behavior that we want to see in our society. It requires us to be more involved in voting in primaries and primary runoffs. It requires us to do the hard work to make sure this democracy continues to exist for another 247 years. And guess what? I think we can do it. And I'm excited about our future. Things will get a little rougher before they get better. But those are the things. We got to get back to those values. And that's how we're going to be able to solve most of our problems.
You make a very compelling case in the book.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Good? Okay.